As we go into 8 range now, this is where I have Dan Campbell, another a coach with a 29-33-1. Obviously had a really good season last year, taking his team to the NFC Championship game. So he's definitely gotten the most out of his team, but it's been short-lived. So it's always seemed to be around a 500 coach or worse. Beside a good season last year, can they keep it up this season? That's what I'm thinking around the Lions. But tell me about what you got going on at 8th.
Well, this is where I don't necessarily have him, but I think this is Sean McDermott territory, because I was going back and forth between Campbell and McDermott for 7 and 8, because I don't think McDermott is in that top 6. I definitely don't think he's top 5 yet, but I think that McDermott is somewhere within this range. So I guess I can start having the McDermott discussions now, because on one side, McDermott's done a lot of great things for the Bills. 4 straight division championships, the playoffs 6 out of 7 years, and he has a great win percentage. But what's the biggest knock? They cannot win the big game, and they've only been to 1 AFC championship game, and essentially window 1 is closed now. They got rid of Stephon Diggs. They got rid of Jordan Poyer. We still don't know about Micah Hyde, Trey White, Mitch Morse. So this is a youth movement with the players and the coordinators now with Joe Brady and Bobby Babbage. So this is window number 2. And I think it's almost criminal that they only got to 1 AFC championship game with that core of players. With Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and you only have 1 AFC championship game to show for it. Not to mention 13 seconds. I mean, that is a big stain on his resume. So that's why I think, it's good to recognize all the good that McDermott has done. And that's why I think he is a top 10 head coach. And in this case, at least top 8. But I can't go much higher than 6 or 7 here, just based on what happens in January every single year.
So one of the bigger discussions I have isn't necessarily with anything you said. It's who are you putting in their top 5? Just not you personally, but anybody, just not to have McDermott there. So you're looking at Mike Tomlin. Obviously, he's had a successful past, gets trounced in the playoffs now. Like, it's kind of like a thing of the past. So we're gonna hear a little bit about Tomlin. Like, why is Matt LaFleur always considered better? Dan Campbell. Like, I understand, like, we have bias of Bills in a negative way here to where we rank him lower, but like, that's who we're going against in terms of like other coaches in this league, where Steelers fans basically want Tomlin out of town at this point. I mean, I guess Campbell with his losing record, I guess you can put above him. You have Kyle Shanahan's up there, obviously, as well. He's been successful. He's had his lapses in his career, almost as like a clone of McDermott on the offensive side of the ball in terms of their success rate, but at least they've gotten to a Super Bowl. You have John Harbaugh, obviously, up there. What has he done lately with this Ravens team? Then obviously, to me, we could keep going up the list. But why I have a struggle with why he isn't 5th is for the reason of like Mike Tomlin, Matt LaFleur, and Dan Campbell. So you would basically say all 3 of them are better than McDermott, right?
Yeah, but that's where I was getting caught up a little bit, because I said maybe McDermott is better than Campbell. And that's why I figured we would discuss that at least, because I would see both sides to that. Because Dan Campbell, to your point, doesn't have a winning record. He's been with the Lions since 2021, and his record is 29-33-1, good enough for a 468 win percentage. But here's the thing. I think both of these guys are great in the locker room. They're great culture guys. They have great character. They're player coaches, right? All those accolades. But I think this is an interesting aspect to discuss, is that Dan Campbell's ceiling is higher than McDermott's right now because of what I said. McDermott already had window 1 expire, and now he's working with window number 2. So Dan Campbell, what the Lions did last year, that was like the 2020 Bills, where it's like, oh, wow, we got this new shiny toy here. Everyone's favorite, the fan favorites here it was the Buffalo Bills. Now the Detroit Lions, they got to the championship game. Wow, let's see what Dan Campbell can do. And what did Sean McDermott do after 2020? 3 straight divisional losses. So I could look at that past experience and say, well, McDermott does have the resume. He has a win percentage. He has a division titles. And we have to see what Campbell can do first before we can put him higher than McDermott. But I could also see it on the other side and say, well, Dan Campbell has a higher ceiling than McDermott because he's still in that window number 1 phase.
But he's kind of bounced around though. So I guess he's in window number 1 phase of Detroit. I mean, is there really a window? They're on a Jared Goff style deal. Like they're paying now Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, I guess what would we consider window 1 for them? Just a certain amount of time? Or I guess when would that expire? Obviously, he had some experiences at Miami going 5-7 in 2015 as a head coach. Like, to me, I have to see Dan Campbell do more. Like, after he does something this year, I would then venture to say, like, I can put Dan Campbell now toward the top of my list. But I can't personally put him higher than 8. It's not just a McDermott thing. That's just where I see him, because losing record, like, I'm glad he had 1 good season, but I need 2. Like, I can't have 1 good year. And I mean, he's made the playoffs 1 time.
Yeah, that's fine. So if you want to put Campbell at 8, and then I would put McDermott 7, but I can't put McDermott any higher than that. Like, until McDermott can win the big game, I'm not putting him in my top 5, even my top 6. So with that methodology here, I have Dan Campbell at 8, Sean McDermott at 7, and then I have Matt LaFleur at 6, because I think that he does have those regular season wins. He has those division titles, and he can get his team to the championship game. And I just think that, he's worked with Aaron Rodgers and now Jordan Love. And it seems like the Packers are also on the incline here. And I think that their second window is like wide open here based on how last season finished for them. And I think that, obviously when you have Aaron Rodgers, it makes it a lot easier. But I think that LaFleur was able to do a lot of good things with the Rodgers-led team. And now it's like they didn't even miss a beat. And there's no drop off. And it's like, oh, now we have the next QB in line here, the next QB in succession. And we're just going to run it back here with Jordan Love. And we're just going to get to our 3rd NFC championship game in the last, 6 years or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like, the way mine would go would actually go, for me personally, it would go Matt LaFleur 8, and I would put Dan Campbell 7. I thought Dan Campbell outcoached him. I thought that Aaron Rodgers was super uninspired in 2022. He's always struggled to find a defensive coordinator. One of the biggest things around LaFleur that I was reading was that he's bungled the 2021 NFC Championship game with some decisions himself. So I just struggle with, like, what he's done that's any different than Sean McDermott. And then obviously now not even winning his division now with someone, Dan Campbell, who's, like you mentioned, is on the up and up, and it might be the shiny new toy there. Like, I personally have, the way mine would go, it'd be Campbell would be ahead of LaFleur. So that's how I would look at it. But I mean, in terms of our list, I mean, you have McDermott 7, and then obviously LaFleur 6, I'm guessing. Is that correct?
Yeah. And, Matt LaFleur, he's been with the Packers since 2019. His win percentage is .675, so a 56-27 record. And I believe he had 3 straight 13-win seasons to start his coaching career, correct?
I believe so.
Now, those were all with Rodgers, right?
Yes, they would have been.
Yeah, okay, because last year was the first year without Rodgers.
Yep, correct.
So, again, it makes it easier when you have Aaron Rodgers, but you could say the same thing about Josh Allen. So, I know I said I wouldn't put McDermott any higher, but this is like the last possible spot that I would put McDermott at 6. Like, I cannot put McDermott in the top 5 yet. So, I mean, like, if you want to agree that way and say it goes Campbell 8, LaFleur 7, McDermott 6, like, that is the furthest
sure.
I can't put McDermott.
Yeah, but also, like, do you have LaFleur above Campbell? So you would have LaFleur above Campbell?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, I have it reversed, but we can go with that. So Campbell 8, LaFleur 7, and then McDermott 6. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. So there we have it. So there's the slotting of the non-top 5 coaches, which would be, there's some interesting debate there. Like, LaFleur's resume is very offensively very similar in terms of, like, what he's been able to do as a coach to, like, what Sean McDermott has. So they have a lot of similarities, like some decision problems. LaFleur has historically struggled at the defensive coordinator spot. So there's been definitely some discussions. They're an interesting debate. Really, they are. The difference is, like, the Jordan Love-led Packers versus Josh Allen-led Bills. We'll see how this turns out next year. But that's, I guess, for now, where we're going to slot it in for this season.
Now, before we move into the top 5, Now, we just made the case that Sean McDermott is going to be at number 6, but tell me why you think he could be in the top 5.
Sorry. So why would I think McDermott would be in the top 5? So if you take it another level, right? So there's a couple of coaches that, like, obviously we're probably going to agree to number 1, probably 2, probably 3, but then it gets interesting. I think one that you can discuss is Tomlin. Like, how recently are we going to give him credit for? Like, the team's been kind of a mess. They get a lot out of those 9-8 teams. They were a mess in the playoffs this year. Like, there was a lot of talk about firing Tomlin, and we're still giving him top 5. I think we have a little bit of like history bias in there of like the Bill Belichick style of bias of where would we put, like, if Pete Carroll was still on the list. That's kind of how I look at it a little bit. Like, I think we have a little bias of putting Mike Tomlin in the top 5. Like, they want him fired. They legitimately want him fired there. They're going probably all in for the last time in Pittsburgh of like trying to make big changes that Pittsburgh doesn't generally make. And they just don't fire coaches there. Like, they're kind of like the Yankees. They don't make a move. But they did go in with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, drafted Roman Wilson, really redid their offensive line. The defense is always pretty good, as we saw for most of the year, but they got kind of ripped apart in the playoffs. But he's my number 5, but I would have McDermott above Tomlin at this. He got outcoached by him pretty extensively. So we'd have to take a lot of his way past with Ben Roethlisberger, like many moons ago with Ben Roethlisberger, to really consider Tomlin in the top 5. That's how I look at it.
See, and Tomlin's in my top 5 because he has the experience, he has the Super Bowl, and he gets the most out of his players. Like, I don't understand how all these fans can say we need to fire Mike Tomlin when I think they should really be saying we need to find a quarterback, because the fact that this guy can still make the playoffs and have winning records when they're trotting out Mitch Trubisky, no offense to Mitch, I love Mitch, but he's a perfect backup quarterback, but he was the starting quarterback last year. Kenny Pickett, the reincarnated Mason Rudolph, noodle arm Ben Roethlisberger, he couldn't even throw his last year. And Tomlin still leads his team to the playoffs, not to mention all the success that he had earlier on in his career. So I don't understand why Steelers fans are so against him. And I really think that Pittsburgh is going to be a very tough out this year, because I think Russell Wilson is going to kind of reinvent himself. And I think that regardless, Tomlin is going to get his 9 wins. You add Russell Wilson, this could be an 11 or 12 win team. I know they have a very hard schedule, but I wouldn't count the Steelers out. And, Tomlin's career record, 173, 102. So he has a 633 win percentage, and he's been there since 2007. So I just think he has a little bit of everything between the experience, the accolades, even recently. I know they bottomed out, as recent as this past season. The Bills crushed them in the playoffs. But again, look at their quarterback situation. And they deal with a ton of injuries as well. So I think Mike Tomlin is a top 5 head coach.
Follow-up question on Tomlin. Why Tomlin over A, LaFleur, and B, McDermott?
I think for all the reasons that I just laid out. Like, he can get to the big game. Like, we've seen that in the past. I know it's been a while, but I think the reason why he hasn't been able to get there recently is because of the quarterback situation. Like, if Mike Tomlin had Josh Allen, I think that they could at least get to 1, if not 2 more AFC championship games. So that's why I think McDermott isn't a top 5 head coach yet, because I need to see him take this team back to the AFC championship game. Like they can't just keep bottoming out in the divisional round. And we sit here and say, oh yeah, McDermott's a top 5 head coach. Everything's great. And we're building a new stadium. McDermott's going to be here forever. Like, I'm thinking there could be an expiration date here. I know Terry Pegula probably doesn't want to fire McDermott, but if they continue to lose in the divisional round, his seat is going to be very, very warm.
Yeah, it's a tough debate. Second winningest coach in all of sports. Also, in terms of and also one of the biggest discussion points are one of the only teams beside the Chiefs to win playoff games in back-to-back years. There's definitely a lot of pros. Like, he is the next up after the Super Bowl coaches. Like, he is the next in line. So we have to hyper focus on like 13 seconds. Where how did we not get a message into the kicker? Does a squib kick change that game? We'll never know. We got some decisions in there that are challenging. And also having to be in an era. Josh Allen is in an era himself, but they're in an era with Andy Reid and a Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes combo. So is there really, like, beside being perfect in every facet of the way, like, is there anything we could do? The Chiefs stumbled down last year. We're to a point where, like, there was like weird scenarios where they wouldn't have won the division. It was a super weird stumble at the end of last year. Travis Kelce was looking like he was done. And then all of a sudden, like, Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. The Bills took advantage, in my opinion, in a really good first 3 quarters against the Chiefs. They played really well. So, like, for me, like, I just don't knock McDermott for the last loss. Like, it's different than 13 seconds where there's obviously a lot of criticism there. Like, McDermott also did his best to coach with 0 linebackers. Like, the one position that Andy Reid and Sean McDermott and Patrick Mahomes take advantage of on a defense is the linebacking position. And the Bills literally went out and signed like 10 guys that we've talked about on the show to correct that issue. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all translates this season. But I thought, like, the coaching job that they did after that hit piece that came out about all the different points of contention in the Bills locker room, and they were actually rallied and then continued to win out, stomped in the snow game, stomped the Steelers to where the Steelers were trendy. They were playing good defense. The Bills were not going to be able to get through that. Absolutely stomped them. They were just in position to not continue to get that one. The thing the Bills need to do is get the 1 seed. They need to have a year where they get that stupid 1 seed. They get a bye. And instead of losing Terrell Bernard, now Terrell Bernard and the entire team is resting. Gabe Davis is probably eligible to play. Like, there's so many different components of all of this thing. But I just don't think we're even in any type of territory to where McDermott's on the hot seat. But also, like, I personally have him I'm fine with, like, agreeing to put him in 6 because until he makes the game, like, I understand the argument that he could be 6, he could be 7, he could be 8. For me, it's more about the guys we've talked about not deserving it either, besides some of the top guys. Like, there's a couple names that, like, what have they done? So that's really where I struggle. Not that I think that McDermott's an infallible number 3 overall coach. It's just that, like, against his peers, he's been more successful. Like, he's been more, and we could say it's Josh Allen, but he's been more successful. So that's why, you asked me a question earlier, why would he be in the top 5? Those would be the reasons for me where I would have him 4th overall as a 4th overall head coach. Regular season matters. Regular season success matters. It's a dart and it's a playoff lottery ticket. And one of these years, you're going to cash it in, and even against Patrick Mahomes. So that's kind of where I feel it. We need those lottery tickets. We need those top 3 seeds. And one of them is going to cash in one of these years. And that's why I'm feeling pretty good. And, like, yeah, this is a great point by Spin to kind of cap this off. Any head coach has gone without a franchise. I agree with that. Like, I firmly agree with that notion that, like, there's been some examples of, like, some decent coaching jobs without franchise quarterbacks, but, like, most of these guys are nothing without their franchise quarterback. They have to get credit for A, agreeing to draft this guy, B, helping develop him, C, putting him in position to win, D, always doing what's right by him defensively in the regular season when Josh is struggling, where Sean is holding his end of the bargain, missing 3 of his best defensive players. So we can't forget, like, the masterful job that Sean does at the end of every single season to put him in position to be the 1 or 2 seed. Like, Kevin, they put him in position every year to win 3, 4. You said it earlier in our show in November or October. Like, they win 6 in a row every year.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about McDermott before we finish off the top 5 here is I think he is definitely worthy of being in this range that we're talking about for all the reasons that you just laid out. Like, they win every single year, and they play their best football in December. And, even last year, after that hit piece came out, and then everyone thought, like, oh man, like, he's done for. Well, what'd they do? They ripped off 5 straight wins, and they won the division week 18, like I predicted on the debut of our show here on Built in Buffalo. But, other things like putting his players in position to win, especially on defense, like getting AJ Klein out of his RV, and he was the leading tackler against the Chiefs in the playoff game. He's undefeated.
Played well against the Steelers.
Yeah. And McDermott's still undefeated after the bye, right?
Yes. Yep.
So, like, they never lose following the bye. He's very good at self-correcting, and they usually don't make the same mistakes twice. But, as much as we say, oh, he's good at self-correcting, and if the Chiefs beat him 1 year, well, okay, cool. You can beat them the next year in the regular season, but can you beat them in the playoffs? And that's where I think McDermott is getting held up by a lot of people, myself included, for these rankings, because until he can win that big game and get the Bills over the hump and finally get past the Chiefs, then he can finally become a top 5 head coach. But until then, he's sitting on the outside looking in.